You're walking beside the wagon. It's day 40. Your boots are full of dust as fine as flour. And your lips have split open in the dry air, so you rub axle grease on them, which is exactly as pleasant as it sounds. You keep glancing at the ridgeline. That's where the danger is supposed to come from. That's what the guidebooks warned you about, what your neighbors back in Missouri whispered about, arrows, an ambush. Painted riders on the horizon. You're watching the wrong horizon. The thing that's going to kill the most people in your wagon train isn't on that ridge. It's in the cup of water you just drank. So let's answer the question honestly, with the actual numbers, because almost everything you've been told about this is wrong. What actually killed people on the Oregon Trail? Let's start with the killer everyone expects, because it's the one that barely shows up. In 1979, a historian named John Unruh published a massive study of the overland trails called The Plains Across. He did something nobody had bothered to do. He counted. He went through the diaries, the letters, the records, and tried to tally every immigrant killed by Native Americans across 2 entire decades, from 1840 to 1860. The number he landed on was 362. 362 people over 20 years, out of hundreds of thousands who made the trip. And here's the part that really detonates the Hollywood version. Over that same period, immigrants killed more Native people than the other way around. Unruh's estimate runs the other direction at over 400. The circled wagons you've seen in every Western? They circled them at night to keep the cattle from wandering off. It was a fence, not a fortress. Most encounters between immigrants and native nations weren't battles at all. They were trade. Native people sold them fresh food, ferried their wagons across rivers, guided them through crossings they'd never have survived alone. The pioneers were terrified of a threat that mostly existed in their own heads. So if the arrows weren't filling the graves, something else was. And make no mistake, there were graves, a staggering number of them. The route from Missouri to Oregon ran roughly 2,000 miles, and it's been called the longest graveyard in America. Estimates vary a lot, because nobody was keeping a careful ledger of the dead. But the rough figure historians come back to is that around 1 in 10 people who set out never arrived. Out of the hundreds of thousands who tried it, that's somewhere in the range of 20 to 30,000 dead. Possibly more across all the overland routes combined. Spread those bodies along 2,000 miles, and you get a corpse every 50 to 100 yards. A near continuous line of shallow graves, most of them unmarked, many of them dug right into the trail itself so the wagon wheels would pack the dirt down and hide it from wolves. One killer did most of that. The emigrants had a name for it. They called it the Unseen Destroyer. Picture a soft sandstone cliff in what's now Wyoming called Register Cliff. Immigrants carved their names into it like a guest book, proof they'd made it that far. In 1850, a man named A.H. Unthank scratched his name and the year into the rock. 1 week later, he was dead of cholera. His name is still up there. He never made it to a marked grave. Cholera was the #1 killer on the Oregon Trail, and it killed in a way that broke people's minds a little. You could be perfectly healthy at breakfast. By noon, your stomach would knot up. By the afternoon, you'd be cramping, vomiting, hollowed out by diarrhea so violent it drained the water from your body faster than you could replace it. Your skin would wrinkle and turn a dull blue as you dehydrated. And by sundown, you could be dead, fine at breakfast, buried by dark. If you somehow survived the first day, you usually lived. Most people didn't get the chance to find out. And here's the cruelest mechanical detail. Cholera spreads through water contaminated by human waste. The immigrants didn't know that. Nobody knew that yet. So thousands of wagons followed the exact same route, camped at the exact same water holes, and fouled the water for everyone coming behind them. They were drinking from a supply they were quietly poisoning themselves, day after day, with no idea they were doing it. It hit hardest on the first third of the trail, the stretch from Missouri up to Fort Laramie, and it exploded during the gold rush years of 1849 and 1850, when the trail got jammed with prospectors, and the water holes turned into something you wouldn't wash a dog in. Cholera wasn't really a disease outbreak. It was a math problem. Too many people, one water supply, no understanding of why everyone kept dying. But cholera had company, and this is where the trail stops being an adventure story and shows you what it actually was, because the trail was crawling with children. These were farm families packed into wagons, and the wagon was the single most dangerous object any of them owned. Dysentery, that endless, grinding bowel disease, is often described as the great killer of children on the trail. The young and the old dried out and died from it the same way they did from cholera, just slower. So already, the people dying in the highest numbers weren't gunfighters or soldiers. They were toddlers and grandmothers. And then there were the wheels. A loaded wagon weighed over a ton and rolled along at maybe 2 miles an hour, slow enough that everyone walked alongside it. That sounds safe. It wasn't. Children rode up front, got bored, leaned out, slipped. One survivor described a little boy who fell over the front of the wagon, and the great wheels rolled directly over his head and crushed it. There's a record of an 8-year-old named Richard Harvey who died exactly that way. The wagons couldn't be stopped quickly, especially going downhill, where a ton of wood and iron just kept going no matter what was under it. Parents spent the entire journey terrified their kids would fall the wrong way at the wrong moment, because plenty of them did. The most ordinary object in their lives, the thing carrying everything they owned, was also the thing most likely to kill their children. Stated plainly, because the plainness is the point. The trail mostly killed the people too small or too sick to get out of its way. If the wagons didn't get you, the rivers were waiting. There were no bridges across most of this. To cross a river, you either forded it, prayed your wagon didn't tip, or paid a ferryman who'd spotted a golden business opportunity in your desperation. At one notorious crossing of the Green River in 1850, 37 people drowned in a single season. The ferryman who ran these crossings could charge up to $16 to take you over, which was nearly the price of an entire ox, and one ferry reportedly cleared $65,000 in a single summer. So you could drown or you could get fleeced. The trail really did offer something for everyone. Then there were the guns. Nearly every wagon was a rolling arsenal packed with weapons by people who, in a lot of cases, had bought a firearm for the very first time specifically for this trip, out of fear of the attack that mostly never came. They were not good at it. Accidental shootings were genuinely common. People shot themselves pulling a loaded rifle out of a wagon by the barrel. They shot their friends. They shot their own oxen. Cheap guns blew up in their hands. The rattlesnakes and the lightning everyone feared? Real, but minor. Lightning killed maybe a half-dozen people across the whole era. The far greater danger was the nervous man 2 wagons over with a gun he didn't know how to hold. Notice what's missing from this entire list. The arrows. The ambush. The thing on the ridgeline. It almost never appears because it almost never happened. And once you really sit with the numbers, the myth flips completely inside out. The most dangerous thing traveling the Oregon Trail wasn't waiting out there in the wilderness. It came in the wagons. In 1847, missionaries Marcus and Narcissa Whitman were killed by Cayuse people in what got remembered as a massacre. But the trigger was a rare measles epidemic, carried west by the immigrants that was tearing through the Cayuse and killing their children while the white patients at the mission kept surviving. The Cayuse came to believe the missionary was poisoning them. The diseases the settlers spread without knowing devastated native communities up and down the trail, far beyond anything the immigrants suffered. The wagons weren't moving through a dangerous land. For the people who already lived there, the wagons were the danger. So here's the real answer to what killed people on the Oregon Trail. It wasn't a villain. There was no dramatic enemy. It was bad water you couldn't see was bad. It was your own wagon wheel. It was a river you had to cross and a gun your neighbor didn't know how to hold. It was dysentery and exhaustion and rotten luck, grinding through the very young and the very old first. That old computer game had exactly one thing right. You have died of dysentery. It's not heroic, it's not cinematic. Nobody makes a Western about it. But it's true, and it's worse, because it means most of these people died scared of the wrong thing entirely, scanning a ridgeline that was never the threat, while the actual killer sat quietly in the bottom of their drinking cup. The next time you fill a glass straight from the tap, and don't think about it for even a second, remember that's the single upgrade that would have saved more of them than any rifle ever could.